Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Lunchtime Learning. I'm delighted today to be joined by Danny Grant, who is the National Head of Training at McGrath in Australia. He works with a legend that is John McGrath, also Troy Malcolm, and also Con, and a few other amazing people there. Danny, welcome. Thanks very much for joining me today. I'm really, really grateful. How are you?
Excellent. Thanks for having me, Stephen. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure, and you know what? I must thank Lee Woodward for the kind introduction. So thank you, Lee. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into agency? Who have you been working for? And then we'll go from there.
Wow, I think I think it's 27 years now in real estate. So started when I was about 12, as you can tell. Um,
Obviously.
I started in property management and did that for a few years and did a little bit of office management. And then I'm from a regional area in Australia, and one day I decided to just go and visit a sales meeting at McGrath in the Big Smoke in Sydney, and they said to me, "Oh, would you consider being a salesperson? Come to a job interview," which I thought was a one-on-one interview, but in those days in McGrath, it was very difficult to get into, and I found myself in a room of about 50 other young hopefuls, and you had to go through this process of three separate interviews, group interviews, and made my way in there and was a sales agent for many years. I actually left McGrath at a certain point and became a principal of one office, which we grew into three, and we ended up selling that business, and also started a prop tech company somewhere in there with a few of my other business owners, which we've subsequently sold to realestate.com. And then John McGrath came knocking and said, "Look, hey, what are you doing now? Do you want to come and do training?" And I thought, okay, well, look, I'll set up the training platform for you. Do that for about a year, and almost 4 years, I'm still here, Stephen.
Okay, right. So thank you for all of that. I'm going to ask you loads of questions on what you just said, but I'm going to start going back to your property management career. Um, so what were the lessons that you learnt from being a property manager that you brought into sales and training and customer service?
Oh, dispute resolution is a big one. Time management is another thing, and controlling the uncontrollables. I guess that there's always things that'll be thrown at you in property management. And it's a unique kind of position because I mean, I went into it in my early 20s, and I guess I sort of hadn't really dealt with, people yelling at me or, handling somebody's asset, and then tenants unhappy, vendors unhappy. So it was sort of thrust into that customer service, if you like. And it probably the very early lesson I learnt was that communication solves a lot of things. So that kind of held me in good stead going into sales later on. I didn't know much when I went into sales, but I knew that if I just communicate with people, then the rest generally will get taken care of.
So you talk about communication and it's fascinating because when I came 6 years ago, we met a gentleman called John McManus, um, who I think at the time was working for LJ Hooker, and then I think he may have gone back to McGrath. And we sat in one of his prospecting sessions, and it was bang, 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 really over communicating. And then we also met with Matt LaHood and Troy, and we were having these discussions about vendor care and communication. And, some of the conversations were, well, we're talking to our vendors every day. Um, and, even if there's no news, there is some news, because something's happened. So we're letting them know what we're doing every day. And can you over communicate? Because when I came back and we had this conversation with UK agents, I go, calling sellers before 7 o'clock in the morning, having conversations definitely wouldn't work here.
Yeah, look, I think the first thing is when you're dealing with a client, asking them how do you like to be communicated with. And you'll find, depending on their job and what they like, some will like text messages, some will like video messaging, not come and seeing them in their house. So there's lots of different ways that we can communicate. It can be just simple as little text messages during the day, or as an agent, sometimes if I had a lot of clients, there'd always be that one client that you didn't particularly like very much, that wasn't that nice to you. And if I called them in the morning, it'd ruin my day. So I used to do a pre-video message saying, these are all the things I'm going to do today. I'll give you a call at 6 o'clock tonight, and I'll let you know how I go, and then I could get on with my day. But also, I think sometimes you get clients that will hide from you a little bit. You know, they're sort of ignoring the messages that you're giving them. Maybe you want to do a price reduction, or letting them know that something's not going quite right. And that's when you've just got to get in front of them, I think, and be face to face. So even though, yes, some will think that you're communicating too much, sometimes it's avoidance. But I think I always like the saying that communication is kind of key to everything, but it builds trust, and force creates resistance. And sometimes I think when you don't communicate enough, you're trying to force a price reduction onto somebody that they're just not, you just haven't communicated enough. Or sometimes you want to do a price reduction quite early, and they jump down your throat and say, no, I would never sell at that. And then we don't communicate it again. Whereas we forget that, well, actually, what we're doing is we're just planting seeds. I look at it like it's boxing. You can't expect to do a knockout blow straight away, but the jabs really do have an impact. So it's like communicate, 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 and then, force creates resistance, communication builds trust. So you keep that communication up, and it makes it a little bit easier down the track. It's like drip filtering this information.
Perfect, thank you. I just want to pick up on something you actually said there, the pre-video message. So, can you go into talk about that in a bit more detail? What that would look like, and what sort of things are you sending?
So look, it's authentic, and you can do it in a couple of ways. It could be that someone's called me up, they're thinking of selling, and I want to send them out some information on myself, and I do a little video of myself saying, "Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. It was really nice to chat to you over the phone. Looking forward to seeing you tonight at 7:30. I've prepared an agenda for you, which is what majority of my clients would like to talk about. What I'd like you to do is just pick out what you'd like me to focus most on, and add anything else to the agenda. Look forward to seeing you tonight." So that gives me a nice introduction above all my competitors that probably you're not going to do that. The other way is communicating through the process that it could be I've done an open house, and I've got a lot more open houses to do on a Saturday. They get home after their open house. They're wondering how it's gone. And I sort of don't have the time, because I'm going to another home, to give them a proper communication, or I don't want to get stuck on the phone. So it'll be, "Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, it's Danny. Just letting you know how we went today. Had 10 groups through, 2 people came back for a second look," whatever it may be. I'm going to be finished my day of open houses probably around 5 o'clock. So maybe about a 5:15, I'll give you a call then, and I'll fill you in with more details. During the week, that could be a Monday morning. Today, I'm going to call everybody back that came through our for inspections. I know that you'll be home from work at 6:30, so if you don't mind, I'll give you a call then with further updates. So what then happens is that it relieves them, and they know I'm controlling my day. So I'm saying I'm going to call you here, and I don't get that call in that I have to answer and I'm not ready for it. Because sometimes, I want to do what I call reverse engineered email. I might have a sequence of things that I want to talk to them about and make sure that I get through them. And then afterwards, I can say to them, "Look, I'll just put all that in writing, what we spoke about, and I'll email it to you afterwards. But I've already created the email, but I just want to make sure I'm covering off all the contents properly." So I want to be prepared for the conversations, because they're important. They really need to land. I don't want them to be fluff. And I think sometimes when we get caught on the fly, like for instance, we haven't had a good open house, and someone says, "I had the open go," and you go, "Oh, good," when it wasn't good, instead of saying, "Well, actually, I'm a little bit worried about it." So it's preparing to have the right conversations. And I think video messaging just, you know, solves your whole day in terms of organizing yourself and getting on with other things.
Brilliant, thank you. So you talked about controlling your day, and earlier you talked about one of the lessons you learned from being a property manager was how to manage your day. So
Yeah.
the best agents that you train and work with, what does an ideal day for them, and how do they control it better than the average agent?
So it's looking at their rhythms. It's a very easy game to be busy in and very reactive to if you go looking for it. So the rhythms might be for most commonly for us, we will do open houses on a weekend, on a Saturday. So therefore Mondays is very busy with incoming calls about the open houses. Not a good day to prospect. Probably not a great day to go and do appraisals or listing presentations because your focus is off and you're negotiating. So it's understanding that rhythm. So Tuesdays is probably a better prospecting day. Wednesday will be another open house day. Thursday a bit easier. Friday can be an anarchy day as well. So it's finding out what those rhythms are and, you know, booking times in their diaries for when am I going to prospect. I only do it 40 minutes, then have a break, 40 minutes, then have a break. So just good at understanding what they're like in their world, and some are great at getting up at 5 a.m. and I've heard all these things about the 5 a.m. club, and I always say to my agents, are you a morning person or an evening person? And some of them are relieved to go, there's no way I could go to the gym at 5 or 6 a.m. in the morning. And I say to them, that's okay. If you're more of a night owl, then that's when you should go to the gym, or that's when you should be in front of your clients at night, or that's when you should be prospecting because you're more alive. Like we're all wired differently. So it's understanding who they are and probably blocking out a lot of the noise that they hear in the industry, which most of it is, I think, are fibs anyway. I think not everyone's honest, that look, we're human, we get distracted, and the key is just not staying distracted for too long.
So I want to talk to you about prospecting. So I would say in the UK, and be very harsh here and critical of all UK agents, we are way too transactional rather than relationship and building that client for life. And as we discussed, I was in offline just before we started. One of the things I took away when I came to AREC last year was about Sarah Hackett mentioning your buyer for life. And that buyer for life will then become your future seller for life and your client for life. So, what sort of stay in touch policies are working well with you and the agents that you're training?
So I guess the first thing to understand about lead generation is there's a formula to it. And I think what you alluded to there is being transactional. That's prospecting out a need. So I'm hunting for a listing. I use the analogy, it's like when you go to supermarket or major shopping centre and you're looking for a car park. And instead of staying in the one section, you go through multiple sections looking for a car park because you think, oh, well, one will open up the further I go. But the reality is, if you just stayed in the one section, your chances increase dramatically. So that's the same as prospecting. So we teach having smaller BDAs, so you have saturation. The other is the key formula is that when you're starting to prospect through a BDA, a business development area, everything starts with a conversation first, not trying to get a listing. So you're not trying to sleep with the client on the first day, to give you an analogy. Then it grows through nurture. So you want to capture them, put them in your database, then you nurture them. Nurture then turns into trust, and trust turns into a client. And then once you've sold that client, they then go back into nurture. And that's the full cycle. So if you just go looking for an instant listing all the time, you're not going to find one because you'll get no's, no's, no's. All I want is to claim doors, build my database up, and then I have a lot of contacts with these people. Makes it a lot easier to list them, makes it a lot easier to get them at my fee that I want to get them at. And your real estate life is so much nicer. And if we all just learned that formula from the start, that I'm building data, I'm building a database because I'm going to nurture it. Or another analogy is that I think lots of agents have databases of clients, and it's like a farmer having land that they haven't nurtured. Farmers talk about yield. It's all about yield, and you're going to get a good yield if you plant the seeds properly, you prepare the soil properly, you irrigate, you get rid of the pests, you fertilize, then you're going to have a fantastic yield. But what a lot of agents do is they'll get clients in a database, but then they don't nurture it enough, so poor yield. So if you understand that formula of starts with a conversation, grows through nurture, grows through trust, then it turns into a client, then yes, it takes longer, but what happens is it comes back, tenfold. You'll have huge business. So
Yeah,
not
but I don't
prospecting
have
out of the.
I don't have time, Danny. I got better things to do than get on the phone and make calls.
Yeah, look, unfortunately, success is always comes after something that's difficult. And yeah, I think yes, there's always these excuses, and everybody's always got them. Yes, I've got no time. No, you can carve out a little bit of time. You've got time to do different things. If somebody called up and said that they were selling, you'd make time and you'd go and do it. But I think, look, what they're really probably doing is just avoiding rejection, because that is the hardest thing about our gamers, is that we're calling, and most of the time, yes, we are getting rejection. But I think prospecting becomes harder when you do it erratically. So I'll give you a good example. I had an agent that came to me the other day and he said, "Look, Danny, I want to really get good at prospecting. How many calls should I be doing?" And I said, "Well, how many calls do you want to do? How many calls do you think you can do?" "I'm going to do 100 calls a day." And I said, "Okay, so how many calls are you doing now a day?" And he goes, "Oh, none." So I said, "Well, it's unrealistic to say you're going to do 100 calls a day now, right?" So that's like going to the gym and saying, I want to build muscles and I'm going to hit the weights heavily for a couple of days. And then what's going to happen? You're going to get sore for 2 weeks and you won't go back to it for 3 months, and the muscle soreness is rejection in our world. So what you're much better off doing is, well, what can you do? What's achievable? Is 12 calls a day achievable? Yeah, I can do that. Right. Well, let's start with that and let's slowly build up, because we think that it's all or nothing. It's either we're doing heaps of calls or we're not doing any. And we forget that there's something in the middle. And I call it, and it doesn't sound sexy, I warn you, but I call it being consistently average. So let's just work out what that is. Let's get something on the board. Because if we do 12 calls a day and we do that 5 days a week, well, that's 60. That's 60 contacts into the database. So that's not bad. That's better than nothing. Then you're going to have over 1,000 contacts in your database at the end of the year. So start small, build it out. And what you're doing there is what I call exposure therapy. So the more that you do it, you get used to the rejection. So it's learning, like it's never, I don't think prospecting ever gets easy. I think you just learn to handle hard well. You just get a little bit better at handling the hard. And I hate it when agents will talk about, I eat rejection for breakfast. And you go, well, I'd rather bacon and eggs for breakfast. That's not realistic. Our brains are geared for two things: comfort and survival. So, and prospecting's not comfortable. So let's just get that out of the way straight away. No, it's not comfortable. No, the best agents don't love it. They might tell you that they love it, but really it's uncomfortable for everybody. What they do is they just get used to it. They learn to handle hard well.
So you mentioned my favourite C word, which is consistent, there. And I think one of the biggest lessons when I was over at AREC last year, and you had 30 people on stage, um, the message from I think every single one of them, whether it was from Ryan Seahan or Ryan Reynolds or the exceptional agents that were on stage, was that to be exceptional, you have to be consistent and you have to be disciplined. Um, so, how are these best agents being consistent and being disciplined in the disciplines that they need to have to become the best in their area?
Yeah, I think number one, they're very passionate about what they're doing. Um, we we do have an environment in McGrath, and John creates that, where it's an environment of performance. So if you're I mean, to give you a football analogy, if you were playing for, I don't know, you're a good
Tottenham,
player playing for Stoke
Tottenham.
or Tottenham, and you're a pretty good player, right? But you're not maybe in the best team, and then suddenly you go to Liverpool. I'm a Liverpool fan, so I'll say that, and we
So
won
we're
the
both
league. Just to
happy on
remind
this
everybody
podcast.
about that. And then suddenly, suddenly, and Liverpool's probably a great example, because there's been so many players that people go, who? Or Mo Salah, who? Suddenly you're in a great team and you're playing a lot better. So that definitely happens in McGrath. If I look at our number one agent, Alex Jordan, when he came into McGrath, he was doing, for about 12 years, his best year was about 380,000 gross commission. So he's doing 300, 380, and after 12 years of doing that, that's nothing wrong with that. But you'd think, okay, that's his level. And he almost left the industry, and he was with a brand that was getting a very high commission split, and he was contemplating coming to McGrath because of our marketing and elevated way we do things. And John sat with him, and Alex said, well, why should I join McGrath if I'm getting much bigger split where I am? And John said, well, I was never great at maths, but he said, I think, you're a $1 million agent if I've ever seen one, so you're going to earn more with us anyway. It's irrelevant what your split is. So he joined us, and he reached out to people like Matt Steinwade, who's been one of our #1 agents for many years. Peter Chauncey's #2 agent. And Alex had a BDA of about 19,000, 20,000 homes. So it's that car park theory that I said, he's just driving everywhere. And then he realised that Matt Steinwade had an area of about 1,800 homes. Peter Chauncey the same, and they were doing 5-6 million commission a year. And he's like, geez, I'm doing 300 with much bigger BDA. So he shrunk his BDA to 790, huge cull, saturated his area, built his way out, built his team. Alex is now a $11 million agent a year. So he
Wow.
does $1 million a month. And that it wouldn't have been possible if he hadn't come into the environment, #1. So he was always good. He's just probably playing in the wrong side and had someone believe in him. So I think it's that, it's like when you go to school and you just have that one teacher that believes in you. And John's always that one teacher in our brand. Alex was a hidden gem. No one knew about him. And then suddenly #1 in Queensland, one of the top agents in Australia, and a lovely human being as well. So I think, and if I look at those and I look at our top guys, humility is a big thing. They're all competitive, very competitive, right? So they do love to win in a good way. But humility is an important thing, and I mention that because they don't let ego get in the way, right? They have their own goals and they want to really look after their clients, and humility sort of helps. I get helps with that, I think, in a lot of ways. But yeah, just obsessive about doing it the right way and improving. And the other key thing I have to mention is they have great teams. So they've got good support around them. They learn that they can't do it on their own. And Alex, if I look at his team, he's had agents join him that were agents in their own right, doing about 500,000 a year with much higher splits. They've joined his team. They get a much lower split with Alex, but they're now individually doing over 1 million. So there's being part of that team and surrounded by it, helps you perform.
So you talked about the recruitment process with John, and you had to go through three stringent interviews. What sort of things are you being asked to do? So if I was looking to find, an exceptional agent and I'm looking to build a practice, what things should I be looking for in my team?
So I guess what we tend to look for is like we don't like ego. We like people that have that humility and feel like they could be doing better. Maybe they're in a brand that they feel is holding them back, not whinging about it, but feel like, geez, I'm not in the right environment. Or I like using the crab analogy. Sometimes there are environments where, like, if you put one crab in a bucket without a lid, it'll climb its way out. If you put three crabs in the bucket, you don't need to put a lid on it because all the other crabs will hold the other ones back. There's a lot of people that are like that. As soon as they start doing well, everybody's pulling them back. I think sometimes you can just see a hunger in some of these agents to really perform. I think a lot of them have come from very humble backgrounds. If I look at a lot of our top agents, I think all of them have come from pretty humble backgrounds, and there's that little bit of proving people wrong and getting there. And they're willing to sweat, so they've got to be willing to do the hard yards. They've got to be patient. They might be put into a team and they might need to do that for 2 years, and understand that they've got to really work their way up. So yeah, I mean, some of them you can just see it in them, but as long as there's no ego there, they're willing to do the work. And for what reasons you want to get where you are, I want to look after people. It's not, I want to have a good car or I want to do this, or I recall a job interview that John, it wasn't really a job interview. It was somebody that some of our team wanted this agent to join McGrath. He was a pretty high performing agent. And John got on his social media and had a look at this agent's social media. Didn't like what he saw. And John in the interview says, You know, how much more business do you think you could do if you weren't a dickhead on social media? So that was the end of that interview. So we look for certain type of people, you know, because John's like that himself, right? You don't see John on social media going, look at my watch and car and all that. It's about, you know, they've got to be customer centric. They've got to want to look after people and just be obsessive about their job.
Okay, so I come back to when I met John in last year, and we had a brilliant 45 minutes with him. And I asked him, you know, what's the one thing you would advise any agent? And he just said, whatever you think bigger, and then think bigger again, and think bigger
Yeah.
again. We met Colin that morning, and Colin was sharing the story how we met John and how we managed to. John said, where do you want to be in 10 years' time, and where do you want to be in 5 years' time? And Con managed to get where he wanted to be in 10 years in 13 months and 5 years in 6 months. So that thinking big is, you know, is a massive thing. Um, so thank you for that. Coming back, you said you built your practice, you became a principal, you went from 0 to 3 or 1 to 3, and then you sold it. So briefly, what was that process like, and going through the process of growing and then selling?
Yeah, it was interesting for me because so we had three other directors and I had bought out a director that founded the company. There was two founders, and that took a couple of years, that process of buying him out. And then we had another one that had been there for a while, and he was contemplating selling as well. And my idea was is that I was going to stay in there for the long haul. So I was a director in there for about 7 years. So I didn't want to sell. But when you've got three other partners, one does, one's a maybe, one will do what the other one will do, you sort of start thinking, well, it doesn't matter how much I object here. It's like saying to your wife, no, we're not getting a divorce. At some point, you are going to get a divorce if you talk them into it. So it kind of was, and the reason that I didn't want to do it at that point because I was a high performing salesperson turned principal. That was my focus. And then I started to get a little bit more into recruiting and mentoring and training the agents. So that was the direction that I was going to go with those businesses and help them grow even more. But we ended up selling it. And then as you do when you're restrained, you've got to then sell. And they wanted me to sell. And then I thought, oh, it was just this strange feeling of now I've kind of broken out of that shell of just being an agent. And no offense to agents, you can be very self-centered as an agent because you've got to be, you know, you got to be very focused on what you're doing. And I certainly was that way. And taking the focus off me and not clinging to my career and helping others grow quicker was just very rewarding. And I guess that's what then got me into training when John sort of said, look, we need a head of training, you know, are you interested in it? And I thought, oh God, I'm not sure I'm cut out for corporate or I'm not sure I'll do this. But I love it, you know, and I guess I had hesitation as well. It's like, well, I'm an agent, you know, it's like being a football player and then suddenly being a manager. Can I do that? And you get surprised that, yeah, I mean, the agents are much more receptive because I was, you know, very successful at McGrath as an agent number one, and I was a principal and started a tech company, did property managers. There's not much that I haven't done, you know, I've got a lot of scar tissue there, and you realize that, geez, that goes a long way when you're training. I've just got to learn to speak in front of a crowd and make it entertaining. And next, so I had to enhance those skills. But yeah, so I guess I didn't want to. It was like a forced retirement in a way. Doesn't mean that I don't think every day should I go back into sales. I go through realestate.com and I look at my competitors taking my old market share, and it annoys the hell out of me, Stephen. You know, I can't. I don't think you know. People ask me, "Oh, do you miss it?" And you go, "Well, if I didn't miss it, I wouldn't have been any good at it." But if I went back into it, it'd be more out of ego than you know. I probably just can't be creative enough in that world now. So that was the process of, you know, salesperson, principal, and now trainer.
So what did you learn in prop tech then? And what are you seeing in Australia at the moment, prop tech wise, that's working well, and with the, I suppose, advent of AI, which is not today, it's obviously been ongoing. But, is there any AI that's working well and what prop tech's working well for you?
Yeah, so our company was a company called Realtair, and that's like online submissions, signing agreements with clients on glass, taking deposits on glass. So an end-to-end solution that you didn't have to touch a piece of paper. And that started, I guess, out of need in our office. So we just started it as a system within our company. It was nothing when we had it. A couple of my other directors that were with me decided to go into that full time. So full credit to them for growing that to what they did. And ironically, the real estate business that we sold after 41 years, the prop tech company got sold after 7 years and I think sold 10 times the value. So I don't know what we were doing in real estate for that long, Stephen, but should have been in prop tech. But prop tech is very hit and miss. So you don't know whether it's going to be worth anything at the end. But I think that worked well because it was making the agent's life easier. It was built by agents and we weren't tech people, so it had to be very simple so they would incorporate it. So understanding the end user was really key to our success, that we didn't make it too complicated. AIs, now that that's sort of sold, I know AI is something that realestate.com, who owns it, are going to develop further. But I think how our agents are using it is, to be honest, probably not that much. Yes, using Chat GPT, one of the ways I train it is when you start in an area, you can get all the area information really quickly now. What are the top 20 things that people love about living in this suburb? And, if I wanted 20% market share and my average commission was 2.2% based on the sales last year, how much would I make? All those things make it really quick nowadays. I think the prospecting aspect of it will be interesting because there are already companies that are using call centers to make calls. I don't think it's quite there yet, but I think it'll be. I think clients will expect us to use AI to a degree, but only to enhance the customer service aspect of it, not to take over. So I think that's an important thing, for agents. So you're either going to embrace it and use it, or you'll fall behind by not using it. But it's definitely not going to replace us. I think our relationships is the big key to our business.
Definitely. So you've just come back from AREC. How was that this year? And any standout speakers and takeaways for the UK audience?
Yeah, there was. It was great. It's always great. To keep going on the AI thing, number one, I think let's talk about Coin. He's the head tech guy with Serhant. So Ryan Serhant, who I'm sure everybody has heard of, spoke at AREC last year. And they've got a system that is AI, and what they're doing is their agents can actually profile the type of their properties. So let's just say they've listed 5 Smith Street. It's in such and such a suburb. Who would be the ideal buyer for this? And it profiles people in their database. And they can go out and pitch based on, these are the people that are going to be targeting, and this is how we'll target them through social media, etc. So that's interesting because I don't know many companies that are utilizing AI in that regard. He's also using it for conflict resolution with agents within the office and their personalities, and how do I solve this situation? And so that was really interesting talk on because it's the first I've really seen embracing AI in a big way in an office and helping list and sell properties. Not all their agents are using it, just some are embracing it. Will Guidera, who was a restaurant owner in New York, so he had the number one restaurant in the world, and he talked about customer service. So just the little things that he would do in his restaurant. It only takes a moment to create a moment was one of his big things. Like, he told a story about some people that were eating in his restaurant, and this is a 5-star restaurant, and he sort of spoke to them and said, look, what are you doing in New York while you're here, and what haven't you done? And they went, oh, look, it might sound strange, but one of the things that we really wanted to do was have a New York hot dog. And he goes, oh, okay. And they said, we're just not going to be able to do it because we go home tomorrow. So he left the table and then he went outside to one of the vendors on the street and he grabbed a couple of hot dogs and he took it to his chef. You can imagine how his chef felt about that. And he said, look, can you just enhance these hot dogs a little bit for me? And the chef sort of cut them up and put a few things on them and brought them to the table. And he said, they forgot the rest of the meal. The meal was fantastic, but that one moment, they loved and were ecstatic about it. So it's little things like that. his plates, people, he knows people in restaurants always look at plates and what their brand is, and he always makes sure that the logo when they lift the plate is in front of someone. He says, look, 2 or 3% of people will lift the plate up, but when they do, that's what they'll see. So there's little things like that you think so easy to incorporate into our business, these little personal touches. The other speaker I really liked was Stephen Bartlett, author of Diary of a CEO. So he spoke about a lot of interviews with different CEOs, and one of the things that resonated with me was he spoke about having a culture of mistakes, and he spoke about Amazon. That was one of their big things, that he said there's so many things that they've failed at that you've never heard of, that just didn't that they've tried that didn't go any good. You only hear about the good stuff. So he said in Amazon's world is they need to keep failing so they can find that one thing that works. And they talked about the innovation graveyard. So there's a lot of things that don't work, but we only just need one good idea that pays for the innovation graveyard. And I thought that's a great analogy, because we sometimes are too afraid to try stuff that don't work, and we don't realize that a lot of these top businesses like Amazon have failure after failure, but they understand that that gets them to one that really does work. So they're probably the standouts. I think there was a little bit more on burning out and mental health. That's sort of interesting. I've noticed that creeping in a little bit. We had a couple of speakers that their life hadn't turned out great. They were a bit too focused on their career, and divorces and things like that had happened to them. And they spoke about that real estate is not your persona. It's talked about the human aspect of it and who you are, and separating yourself from your job. So that was interesting that came in a little bit with some of the speakers, that you can be successful, but you're a human being. You're not the real estate agent. So separating person from persona was sort of a bit of a theme with some of the speakers.
Lovely. I'm very conscious of time. I don't know how much longer we've got. Can I ask a couple more questions?
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
don't mind? Okay, because I know it's getting later there where you are. I want to talk about John McGrath, and highly regarded throughout the world. Started AREC and built it into an event that I think it was in the 26th or 27th year this year, which is
Yep.
absolutely incredibly. Everybody thinks very highly about him. What makes John McGrath, do you think?
Look, it's interesting because I think he came along at a time where, so when he started the business in the 80s, it wasn't the most transparent of businesses. And he was the first to come along and start talking about customer service. And, he was the first to do pro forma building reports for buyers, and the marketing edge that he had. And he was the reason that I got into real estate. So, I didn't think much of real estate as a career when I was young, but then I read John's first book, You Don't Have to Be Born Brilliant, which is available on Spotify. It's out of print, but you can listen to it on Audible or Spotify. And that was the first business book that I read. And what attracted me to John and McGrath at that time was the ethics. Just do the right thing by people. And John's never changed that. He's always talking about customer centric, and I think people resonate with that. Some do, some don't. If you don't like that in our culture, McGrath, then you soon get weeded out and you leave. But that's what attracts people to him, is inherently people want to do things the right way, I think. And I think he came along at a time where that just wasn't a thing. He's a great innovator, so he's always thinking about better ways of doing things. Definitely thinking bigger, and in a good way. Like I say, he'll sit down with some of our agents, and they'll have a great year. Someone's gone from 800,000 to 2 million, and they're in front of John, and he'll say, look, that's great, but if I've ever seen a $3 million agent, it's you. So suddenly, but they take that the right way, that, okay, he believes in me. But yeah, look, what I love about him, and I think what everybody else in our company loves about him, is that he always, the attention to detail, doing things the right way, looking after people is a big thing. I mean, what a lot of people don't know about John is he's quite shy and introverted. So he's not an out there type, which is strange to say when he can be on an AREC stage with 5,000 people and interview Kamala Harris from the states and do an awesome job. But put him in a small environment, and he doesn't cope as well. So I mean, I'm fortunate to know him for a long time and be closer to him than most. And yeah, I think just doing things the right way, that authenticity is such a big thing that I think a lot of people resonate with. And an interesting stat with John is, so we have a top 100 agents in the country that are ranked every year in Australia for all real estate brands. And we were always number one, thankfully. So we were 14% last year. The rankings are just about to come out in the next couple of weeks, but we'll be thereabouts, probably a little bit higher actually this year. So we're normally around 15%. But if I actually look at that top 100 list, so some agents leave us, they become principals elsewhere, or, whatever happens, happens. About 34% of them used to work at McGrath or have worked with John in some form. So that means that more than a third of the top performers in the country have either worked with John or been trained by John, and if I say how many have been influenced by John, I'll say it's 100% that he's influenced. He's the most accessible CEO as well. Like AREC's a good example of that. You don't see any other CEO of real estate brands holding a conference for every brand, and you don't really see McGrath mentioned a lot. You've been to AREC, you would know. There's no promos of McGrath. There's no push on McGrath at all. John's view is, I just want to improve the industry. And if I improve everybody else in the industry, even my competitors, then that's good for us. That helps us all perform. So that's a rare trait, I think, because I think there can be a lot of greed, and it's mine. I'm not going to share any information in our industry. And John's not like that, and that spills down into our company. We're a very collaborative company. I've worked in other brands, and people are pushing you down, not lifting you up. And Alex Jordan, our number one agent's a good example of that. He came in and now he's number one, and the guys that helped him are underneath him. But no one looks at that as in a bad way, and that's all John's influence.
And I think what's really interesting at the moment that I'm seeing on LinkedIn is that there's a number of agents collaborating together to put on training events to help each other grow. So I think Ray White's involved, I know McGrath's involved, Con's involved, and loads of other
Yeah.
ones. And I just find it interesting. And actually, I think you must have read my mind. I was just writing down collaboration, and you said collaboration. So how's that working out? Because that's a really interesting concept that I haven't seen. Because most agents don't like each other, yet they're now being trained by their competition, which is very interesting.
Yeah, and if I look at the offices or the brands that are doing that, they are the bigger brands in each brand, the bigger offices in each brand. So there's a certain type of ilk that are joining in on that, and there's others that would never do that. That I want to share that information. And if I look further on a lot of those, they have been exposed to McGrath, a lot of those offices. So one of them is a brand called Bresic Whitney, which is a top brand. The
Yeah.
the founders from McGrath there as well. So not I don't mean to plug that in a McGrath way, but that's when John leaves this world, that'll be his legacy.
Yeah,
Is
well,
that
we met
attitude?
Bresic. I think we met Shannon. Is it Shannon?
Yeah, Shannon's a great guy.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah. So we met Shannon and we met the other gentleman there. I can't remember his name, so my apologies if you're watching this.
but it's working out well for those guys. Yeah, it's that sharing of information, and they're in slightly different marketplaces, slightly crossover with some of them, but such a great initiative.
It is. It's fantastic. So one final question I want to ask you is just about fees.
Yeah.
So in the UK, the average fee, I think, somewhere between, if we're lucky, 1%, and some agents are raised to the bottom. Um, and I know it's there, but you talked about Alex Jordan, and I'm sure it was when we were with Troy last year. He said Alex Jordan, maybe Alex somebody else, is managing to get 3.25 in his area, whereas other agents are getting 2.25.
Yep.
What are you doing to get that higher fee?
So look, we have a culture of higher fees. Yeah, I always look at it and go, there's different pathways to having higher fees. The one is the first point I can give you is number one, just decide to charge more. Um, you'd be surprised. Like if you heard the story about the fake luxury brand Palessi in America, it was Payless Shoes basically decided to set up a luxury storefront, and they called it Palessi. And they brought in all these influencers and people, and they marked up their shoes by like 3,000% from $20 to $300, etc. And everybody bought into it. And then they were let in on the secret afterwards that they will pay less shoes, but they all fell for it. And you think, okay, so that was just a decision to charge more, wasn't it? The product didn't change, it was just decided to charge more. And I think as agents, sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit. I think if you survey and look at your competitors, you'll be surprised about what they're not doing. So, and also create more value. So don't just go with them, create more value. And, when somebody wants you to drop your fee, it's like, well, compared to what? What are you comparing me to? And I always like what I call the match dialogue. And that is, Mr. and Mrs. Vendor, it's my job as a professional agent to know what my competitors charge. And I know you'll be offered a cheaper fee, but also it's their job to know what I charge. But can I just ask you, why don't you think they choose to match my fee knowing that I charge higher? Because to match my fee would mean they have to match my results, my level of service. And because they can't match that, the only differentiating factor is fee. Was it about hiring the best agent or the cheapest agent? Because I don't think the cheapest agent's going to be the best negotiator. So that's kind of leveling it and going, well, compared to what? So first of all, what are you comparing me to? Why would I do a lower fee than the agent that you don't want to choose? One of the most important things to understand, though, is that when people are asking you to drop a fee, it is just a question. It's not an objection yet. So, for instance, I got someone in to fix my washing machine the other week and got a couple of guys in. I used an app that gets multiple quotes in. First guy smelt of smoke, so I didn't like him. I'm a bit weird like that. Second guy was really well dressed and he came in. And I was going to give him the business anyway, right? So he gave me his price and I went, well, is there any chance you can do that cheaper? And he said, no, no, that's the price. I went, okay. I went with him anyway. Or I was going to go with him anyway, but it was just a question. So people, it's their right to ask if we'll drop our fee. So understand that you can say, look, no, I'd love to work with you, but with respect, I don't adjust my fee. So that's an answer. Match dialogue helps. I think we have an incentive and set fee. I'm not sure whether you do that there. So this is where you might have a set fee of 3.3%, but then you offer them another fee that it might be 2.5% plus 10%. So that's giving people a choice. So it takes the emphasis off, well, here's my fee, that's negotiable, to, well, it's one or the other. And if they say, well, is that negotiable? And you go, well, it depends on where you set the 10%. So suddenly our conversation is different. So that happened in my career where I was 2.2%, and that was higher in my area where it was like 1.5%. So it was already pretty high. So I decided to increase my set fee to 2.75, and I had an incentive of 2.2 plus 10. So I actually didn't change my fee. I just gave them a choice. So if they set the 10% bar too high, it didn't matter. I was getting my fee anyway. So sometimes giving them a choice helps. I think sometimes breaking it down as to, well, let's work out what that is. So the other agents offered you 1.5, I'm 2.2. Well, let's calculate what that would be on $2 million or £2 million or whatever it is. Taking the percentage away from it and say, well, look, if I could show you a way that I can negotiate that price up easily, would you be willing to go ahead? Fees aside, would you be okay going ahead with me? And if they go, yeah, no, we would go ahead. Right, well, great. Now I know I've got them because it's just the fee that I need to sort out. Whereas if they're like, well, fees aside, would you go with me? Well, actually, I'm not happy with the marketing. Well, marketing and fees aside, would you go ahead with me? Well, actually, we don't like doing open houses. Okay, well, open houses, fees aside, would you still go with me? Well, actually, we don't really like you, Danny. Okay, well, if we change that, at some point, you're not going to get it with fees aside, but you've got to isolate, is that really an issue? If it is, well, then let's talk about why I'm worth more than the other agent. But yeah, understand it's just a question and just make a choice to charge a little bit more. Alex Jordan, who you mentioned, is a very good example because in Queensland, where he works, the fees were regulated. You had to charge a set fee. I think it was 2.75%. So every agent in the state, same fee. And it became deregulated. So all the other agents went, beauty, let's lower our fees so we can be competitive. Alex went the other way and went, I'm going to increase my fee to 3.3%. And I can position myself as the higher product because I'm the better negotiator, I'm this, and that's the way he positioned himself. So again, it's just mindset.
Brilliant. Danny, I'm really grateful. I've kept you for far too long, so thank you very much for your time. Thank you for
My
sharing
pleasure.
so much gold. If people want to find you and get hold of you, how do they do that, please?
Yeah, probably emails easier. Danny Grant, DAMMYGRANT at McGrath, MCGRATH.com.au. Or you'll find me on Instagram. My handle is grantspace underscore.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, look, everybody, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, share, and until the next one, Danny, thanks very much for being a wonderful guest. Have a good day, everybody.
Absolute pleasure. Bye, everyone.